From London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Juliet Mann. Our top stories. We need to reboot our country by driving modernisation. China's top political advisory body concludes its annual session in Beijing.
Our other headlines, counting the cost of a global trade war. European stocks fall to their lowest point in 3 weeks.
In trade, as in hockey, Canada will win.
Canada's next Prime Minister talks tough on Trump and tariffs after winning his party leadership by a landslide.
The business of war. European arms imports more than double over 4 years. We're more dependent on the United States than ever before. And
travel chaos in Germany as airport workers across the country go on strike. Thousands of flights are cancelled.
a united push for rejuvenating China through modernisation. That's the key message as China's top political advisory body ends its gathering in Beijing and sets the course for the future direction of the country.
More than 5,000 proposals have been submitted and reviewed. Our correspondent Jen Copestake reports from Beijing.
The CPPCC met today alongside President Xi and other leaders in the Great Hall of the People here in Beijing for the closing session. Now, the chairman of the country's top political advisory body, Wang Huning, said that he had to call on political advisors present to make new and great contributions to advance Chinese modernization, and that was the fruits of the meeting. He said, indeed, these were fruitful results through the joint efforts of all of those present. He urged the political advisors there to work harder to advance national rejuvenation on the path towards Chinese modernization and emphasized the need to enhance the CPPCC's capacity for political consultation and democratic oversight in the participation and deliberation of state affairs. Now, he said they must continue to focus on deepening reform, advancing high-quality development, protecting and improving people's livelihood, and ensuring social stability in carrying out the surveys and making proposals in that sessions. So he said that this year's session had demonstrated the vitality of the whole process people's democracy in China. Now, I can review some of the key areas of discussion that we've heard about this week and the proposals that were centering around strengthening innovation. That's innovation-driven economic policies, enhancing social welfare. We heard about proposals to help the welfare of children, of the elderly, healthcare and education, and emphasizing the need for environmental conservation on the path to long-term economic development in China. So there was a lot that was discussed in the week we've just had. And in his closing remarks, the CPPCC chairman stressed the importance of unity and collective efforts in addressing the challenges that China is facing. Now, this marks the conclusion of the CPPCC session, which will set the stage tomorrow for the closing of the NPC, which of course we'll be covering, and that will conclude this year's 2 sessions.
Let's take a look at a few of the thousands of proposals submitted during the session. The majority, 42%, are all about the economy. Proposals centering on politics and culture had around 8% and 9%, respectively, while over 27% related to social issues. The environment was the subject of just over 12%. Well, this year's government work report continued a promise of more support for tech startups. Beijing's also said it wants to attract more private investment. Our correspondent Wang Tianyu spoke to Raymond Young from ANZ Bank.
The Chinese government wants to support tech development in the economy and also pay close attention to the role of private sector in the technological improvement. It's clearly that the what happened in the last few months, especially after DeepSeek and many others new startups, the success has boosted confidence that China is still a very important source of innovation globally. So I think this is the right direction.
The deficit to GDP ratio is set at 4%, and this is the highest level in history. Why do you think the Chinese government has raised it up to 4%? And what is the purpose behind this move?
I think the 4% official fiscal deficits reflect that the government will be very proactive in terms of the fiscal policy support. This year, having 100 basis points more of fiscal deficit means that the government will try to ride on the recent positive momentum of the economy and to secure the growth momentum going forward. Now, obviously, the question is not how much the governments are willing to spend to the economy, but also how they're going to use the money is more important. So I think that my focus is not just about whether this is 4% or 5% or 3%. It is more about how the government is going to use the money, and is it willing to really able to execute different type of, say, infrastructure projects, consumption support, and or even other measures to offset some of the external headwinds from the very uncertain global environment. I think this means more to me than the number itself.
China will issue a total of 1.3 trillion yuan in ultra-long special treasury bond this year. Is the issuance and the scale of funds in line with your expectations?
I think the issue of 1.3 trillion of ultra-long bond is in line with our expectation. We do believe that in the future, this type of ultra-long bond or extending the duration of bond issue will be a new normal. And that will be a very consistent strategy in considering the China industrial development, because much of the development is about the long-term benefit to the economy. So China also need to extend the duration so that more projects can be funded.
For the first time, the government work report has emphasized stabilizing the real estate market as part of its overall policy framework. So have you seen any sign of recovery in China's real estate sector yet?
In the last few months, we have seen some improvement in some cities in terms of the property prices being under this 70 cities real estate index. We've seen more cities reporting positive month-on-month improvement in property prices. Now, I would regard these as green shoot, but more need to be done to sustain the improvement in momentum. At this stage, it is still too early to conclude that the property market is recovering. I would see that this year is a year of stabilization in the real estate market. Hopefully that will be less contraction in property investment and also some improvement in property price in certain cities. We need to wait for perhaps 1 or 2 years to have a broad-based recovery of real estate price, and also a sustained effort for the local government to execute the central government mandate to stabilize property price. I think we will be able to see some improvement, especially in the second half of this year.
China's retaliatory tariffs on the United States have taken effect, involving around $22 billion worth of goods. They include a levy of 15% on American food like chicken, wheat and corn, and 10% on things like soybeans, pork, beef and fruit. Beijing's urged Washington to change course, saying trade is mutually beneficial for both countries. The European Union says the United States appears unwilling to reach a deal over potential tariffs. A 25% levy on all American aluminium and steel imports is due to come into force on Wednesday, but the EU's Trade Commissioner has vowed to protect European businesses.
I traveled to U.S. last month. I was seeking constructive dialogue to avoid the unnecessary pain of measures and countermeasures. We jointly identified a few areas that would allow us to move forward by fostering mutual benefits. But in the end, as it said, one hand cannot clap.
Well, European stocks move lower as the threat of a global trade war looms. Investor sentiment remain cautious as concerns about U.S. tariffs grow. The Euro Stoxx 50 was down 1% a short while ago. The UK's FTSE 100 down 0.7%. And in Germany, the DAX fell by 1.4%. President Trump says the United States economy is in transition. Speaking on board Air Force One, he claimed the tariffs are going to be the best thing the country has ever done.
It's going to make our country rich again. We have many companies, as you know, auto companies are opening up plants now. We've had 4 or 5 announced already, but many more are coming. And we're basically going to take back the money, a lot of the money that we've given away over many decades.
Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Mitch McCann, in New York. Mitch, strong words there from Donald Trump, but clearly fears are growing over a recession.
Yeah, that's certainly right. Good morning from New York, Jamie. Donald Trump also said in an interview with Fox News there is a period of transition because what we're doing is very big. And by saying that, Donald Trump has essentially refused to rule out a recession in the United States in the coming months. Now, analysts at JP Morgan Chase, which is the largest banking company here in the US, said in a recent report that there was a materially higher risk of a global recession this year because of US policies. It's also reported that strategists at Goldman Sachs say the chances of a recession this year are at around 20%, and they've cited policy changes as the key risk. Now, it's important to note that for many Americans, many American families who are already struggling with the cost of living and supermarket prices, a recession this year will be a very difficult prospect to consider. We've met families during the campaign trail in November in states like Michigan, Pennsylvania, who indicated they were going to vote for Donald Trump because of his business background and, in their view, that the economy was better under Donald Trump's first term. And we're seeing little sign of that success they were hoping for so far, with volatile markets, unemployment ticking up very slightly, and America's partners, as you mentioned, increasingly confused over tariffs being planned to go into effect, then being pulled back and then being implemented. So a lot of volatility at the moment, and that's certainly being reflected in the markets here in the United States and around the world at the moment.
Mitch, so talk us through the US markets, how they're looking.
Yeah, well, let's start with the US markets. This morning, the concerns about the economy contributed to a weak opening on Wall Street. The S&P 500 was down about 1.5% at opening. The Nasdaq was down around 2%. If we look at the live numbers now, the Dow Jones is down around 500 points this morning. The S&P 500 down 2.11% at the moment, and the Nasdaq is down 3.41% as well. So not a good start to the opening day of the week here on the US markets, Jamie. And also that's been reflected, as you mentioned, the European markets as well.
Mitch, thanks for that. Our correspondent, Mitch McCann, in New York.
Canada's next Prime Minister says his country will win a trade war with the United States and has called on Americans to show respect. Mark Carney, the former Bank of England governor, will be sworn into office in the coming days after winning a landslide vote to succeed Justin Trudeau as Liberal Party leader. He's expected to call a swift election and says tariffs on American imports will stay in place until the US commits to free trade.
The Canadian government has rightly retaliated and is rightly retaliating with our own tariffs that will have maximum impact in the United States and minimum impact here in Canada. And my government will keep our tariffs on until the Americans show us respect.
Radhika Desai is a professor of political studies at the University of Manitoba. Good to see you, Radhika. Look, Mark Carney has warned of a dangerous time for the country and says he will stand up to Trump. What can we expect?
Well, I think that on the one hand, of course, given the extent to which ordinary Canadians are incensed at what the United States is doing, Mr. Carney must say what he just said, the clip that you just played at the end of when he was elected yesterday. At the same time, let me emphasize that Mark Carney, in contrast to his closest rival, Chrystia Freeland, had emphasized a much softer tone towards the Americans. He says we have to negotiate. These are our very close trading partners. You have to understand what a lot of trouble the Canadian economy is in. The Governor of Bank of Canada, Tiff Macklem, whose predecessor, of course, was Mr. Mark Carney, has said that if these tariffs are sustained and continue, there will be a deep recession in Canada. Canada exports, most of Canada's exports go to the United States, so Canada is very vulnerable. The Canadian capitalist class is very deeply committed to the relationship that Canada has to the United States, so we will just have to see exactly how tough Mr. Carney can be.
Of course, in his role as central banker, he dealt with a number of political and economic crises. You're saying the big challenge here is going to be potential recession at home, but can he reset the relationship between Canada and the United States?
I think that it's not going to be up to him alone. I think it's going to be dictated also by the Trump administration. And I think that the Trump administration's tariff policies are really a lot of grandstanding for political purposes, because the Trump administration has, or President Trump has essentially won office by telling Americans that the problem that they are suffering from is trade and China and America's trading partners and so on, instead of pointing to the disastrous economic policies being followed at home. So he must appear to be imposing tariffs. The reality, however, will be different based on exactly how much it hurts the United States, how much bargaining power it will give the Trump administration. And so the reality will be rather messy, and it will not be definitely under Mark Carney's control.
What about then Canada and the rest of the world? I mean, one might think his background will mean a real focus on international solidarity. How do you see things playing out?
Well, definitely Canadians in this political discussion in Canada has very much been about diversifying Canada's trading links, naturally with Europe, but also, of course, with China and the rest of the world. And I think that this would, of course, be at any time a very good idea. This, indeed, many sensible economists have been arguing this ever since Canada took the plunge in 1998, negotiating back then the U.S.-Canada free trade deal, which was then followed by NAFTA and so on, pointing out that we should not put all our eggs in the U.S. basket, but this has not been, this advice has not been heeded until now. Now these voices are rising, but we'll just have to see exactly what is possible, particularly if the Canadian government under Carney continues the extreme hostility of the Trudeau government towards China, towards Russia, and the rest of the world more generally. So I think we'll just have to see whether they are willing, whether the thinking in Canada changes.
Radhika Desai, thank you very much.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, Ukraine's president arrives in Saudi Arabia to meet the Crown Prince a day before crucial talks with the United States on ending the conflict with Russia.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
I think it should be more global cooperation.
I would like to hear more the voice of the developing countries.
Globalization has lifted more than 1 billion people out of poverty.
The green transition has to happen. It's a necessity.
For China and the United States are important powers in the world.
What unites us is much more than what divides us.
And I believe China is committed to this agenda.
Join me, Juliet Mann, to set the agenda at these times every weekend on CGTN.
You might think you are better informed in an information age. The fact is, people are more often misled by misinformation. You might think every voice is heard in a digital world. The fact is, many nations and peoples are still underrepresented. And data poverty shuts out many. We at CGTN are committed to transcending the information gap and the digital divide. CGTN, bridging nations and civilizations. CGTN, see the difference.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has arrived in Saudi Arabia on the eve of crucial talks with the United States aimed at trying to end the conflict with Russia.
Zelensky won't be attending the talks himself, but he says his country is committed to constructive dialogue with President Trump's team, which will be led by Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Trump says he expects good results. Our correspondent Nadia Swan is in Jeddah. Nadia, the US Secretary of State's been speaking ahead of this meeting. What did he have to say?
Well, Juliet, Marco Rubio was speaking en route on his flight to Jeddah. He has now arrived in Jeddah ahead of those talks, which are due to start tomorrow. And he sounded very, very positive indeed, and he said he was very hopeful about good outcomes from this round of talks between the Americans and the Ukrainians here in Jeddah. He talked about resolving a very important issue about the pause in US military aid for Ukraine and also the pause in intelligence sharing with Ukraine as well, which has really been quite detrimental for them to prevent themselves from attacks against the Russians. He was also talking about dealing with both Ukraine and Russia and seeing where they are and what they want, talking about trying to find out whether both sides are prepared to actually make concessions and how far they're prepared to go to make those really difficult decisions to achieve what they refer to as a sustainable peace deal, in fact. The other thing that he was referring to as well was a rare minerals deal that was due to be signed a few weeks ago between the US and Ukraine. Now, that didn't happen after a rather acrimonious meeting between President Trump and President Zelensky in the Oval Office at the end of last month. So he said, with reference to that deal, there's a few more details to be worked out before that's actually likely to be signed, Juliet.
And Nadia, how critical would you say these talks are for Ukraine in particular?
They are absolutely vital, Juliet, because essentially this is a chance for Ukraine to repair those damaged relationships with that damaged relationship with the United States after those Oval Office talks. So it's a way for President Zelensky to show that he is trying to improve that relationship moving forward. Now, there's also a critical need, as I said earlier, for them to actually resume military aid and intelligence sharing from the United States so they can defend themselves against Russia. So that is really, really important for the Ukrainians as well. That's what they're looking for. Additionally, they want an air and a sea ceasefire as well from the ongoing Russian attacks that are causing devastation in many Ukrainian cities. They're also looking for a prisoner exchange. Saudi Arabia was key to mediating a prisoner exchange over the last 3 years between Russia and Ukraine, so they're looking for another prisoner swap there. And finally, they're really wanting security guarantees against future Russian aggression. And that, so far, Juliet, is something that the US hasn't actually committed to doing, but that's really something that's very high on Ukraine's agenda.
Nadia Swan in Jeddah, thank you very much.
European arms imports have soared in the past 4 years. According to a new report, the figure rose by 155% between 2020 and 2024, compared with the previous 4 years. And countries have become more dependent on the United States. While Washington supplied around half of European NATO members' military equipment between 2015 and 2019, that figure rose to 64% over the next 4 years. Well, an example of that military equipment that comes from the United States is the F-35 fighter jet. Germany is set to receive dozens next year in a $9 billion deal, and that sparked a wider debate about European reliance on US military equipment. And as President Donald Trump appears to realign with Russia, there are fears within the EU that decades-long security guarantees are no longer so reliable. So the EU has announced its own $860 billion plan to boost defence, made up of loans and changes to borrowing rules. Well, let's talk now to Dr. Matthew George, Director of the Arms Transfers Programme at the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. Matthew, welcome to the programme. Good to see you. How has European defence been changing over the past few years?
Thank you for having me. So, with time, we have seen that, going back to data from the 1950s, Europe actually saw declines in its imports for every 5-year period and has never seen growth anywhere close to this 155% that we see in the last 5. So it's huge in terms of the way that Europe has now started to rearm, and that's what the data shows. It's not what we were seeing before, but now every indicator shows that Europe is buying more arms.
Rearmament isn't like buying a new car, though, is it? I mean, rearmament of Europe could take absolutely years and years. I mean, how strong is deterrence if Europe goes it alone without the United States?
So that's going to be a really difficult question to answer, largely because both sides of the Atlantic are really intertwined. I mean, if you just look at what's spending for delivery, there's about 470 plus combat aircraft alone that European NATO states are waiting for from the US. And it's not just that. Like you said, it's a long process. Some of these equipment can be in service for 40 to 50 years. So it's all about spares, support, development, and so on for the next decades, more than a few decades. And so it's going to be a really expensive decision for Europe to want to do it alone. It's investment into these technologies, not for the next couple of years. It has to be a long-term decision.
Some analysts suggest that the problem with sophisticated defence equipment, F-35s and the like, is that it really does need so much ongoing support from the people you've bought it from. So how do the UK, Europe, almost US-proof, if I can put it like that, their defence purchases?
Well, for that, Europe actually, everyone would have to find a way to do it themselves. And the way that the present system it's going to be really hard for both sides to work really independently of each other. With the decades of trust that has been built up, it was never understood that, or never thought of, that you had to go alone. But if that is the situation, then you'd have to effectively duplicate efforts on both sides of the Atlantic. And that's going to be difficult for everybody involved.
Matthew, I'm sure we'll talk more in the coming months, but thank you for that. Dr. Matthew George, Director of the Arms Transfers Programme at the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute.
Israel is sending a delegation to Qatar to try to advance Gaza ceasefire negotiations. Hamas says it's shown flexibility during separate talks in Cairo and is awaiting the outcome of the Doha meeting. It comes a day after Israel announced it was cutting off Gaza's electricity, a move Hamas described as unacceptable blackmail. Our correspondent Rami Al-Magari reports from Gaza City.
Actually, this decision is viewed by the Palestinian population in the Gaza Strip as one more means of a pressure practiced by the Israeli government and Israeli authorities on the population of Gaza, on the Gaza Strip in general, because of the standoff over the ceasefire phases, the first phase, the second phase, the Israeli conflict, the Israeli-Hamas conflict over the either extension of the ceasefire deal as stated by Israel, or going into a second phase of the deal. Actually, this decision will impact largely the population of the southern Gaza Strip, particularly 200,000 Palestinians in the south of the Deir al-Balah town in central Gaza Strip, because they used to get the desalinated water. And this was the only water plant operating in the Gaza Strip since over the past 4 months, since late 2024, when Israel was able to connect it with electricity based on or upon the request of UNICEF and other international organizations.
Well, that's the view from Gaza. Let's get the picture from Israel now, and our correspondent Jonathan Regev in Tel Aviv.
The delegation has been given a mandate to speak only about a possible extension of the first phase of the ceasefire. This is something that has been reportedly brought up by the United States, by U.S. Envoy Steve Witkoff, who will also be joining the talks in Doha, meaning extending the ceasefire for another month or so until the end of the holy Muslim month of Ramadan and the Jewish holiday of Passover. ceasefire. That will end roughly in mid-April, some 5 weeks from now or so. And so the delegation, the Israeli delegation, is meant to discuss that, extending that first phase for another 5 weeks or so, a ceasefire. Of course, that would include the release of some Israeli hostages. The reports speak of roughly half of the 59 hostages remaining. Of course, there could be many details, how many living hostages will be released, how many dead hostages will be released. But that, according to the reports, is the mandate given to the delegation. Not anything past that, not discussing the second phase of the ceasefire, which would include the complete withdrawal of the Israeli forces from the Gaza Strip and an announcement of the end of the war. On the other hand, this is exactly what Hamas is asking for, exactly that second phase. How do you narrow the gap between the demands of Israel and the demands by Hamas? The solutions should come from the Qataris, from the U.S., from the Egyptians, but at least according to what Israeli sources are hearing, nothing past the first phase. This is what the Israeli delegation will be speaking about, how much progress can be made when these are the circumstances. Again, not exactly clear.
And there were direct talks, weren't there, between the United States and Hamas. What did the Israeli government make of that?
There is a lot of criticism in the Israeli government regarding those direct talks between the United States and Hamas, but never public. This is all under the surface. Is it the lesson learned by the Israeli government following what we saw in that famous meeting now between the American president and vice president with the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky? Perhaps is it the fact that Israel is still very much, there's very much appreciation for the attempts made by the Trump administration, which facilitated the release of the 33 hostages, most of them alive in the first phase of the ceasefire. That could also be the case, but under the surface there's a lot of criticism. There seems to be some kind of an understanding that the U.S. is bypassing Israel. Maybe the U.S. is actually conducting the talks by itself rather than having Israel do it as one of the sides in these talks. So there is quite a lot of criticism among Israeli officials, and reportedly that criticism was also was also delivered by Ron Dermer, the Israeli Minister for Strategic Affairs, when he was visiting Washington. But at least on the ground, still a lot of support for the United States. All the criticism that we know exists is still under the surface, never really being made public.
Syria's new leader has vowed to hunt down the people responsible for carrying out alleged massacres in a coastal region. Almost 1,000 people are thought to have been killed in recent days, mostly from the Alawite religious minority of former President Bashar al-Assad. Our correspondent Haider Kazwini reports.
In its latest poll on Monday, the UK-based Observatory for Human Rights said 973 civilians had died since March 6 in mass killings and execution perpetrated by security personnel or pro-government fighters in the coastal heartland of the Alawite religious minority in northwest Syria. Civilian death and house burning targeted the Alawite community were also reported in a central part of the country. A delegation from the UN is set to visit the coastal city of Latakia today to meet the civilians who have sought shelter and protection in the Russian air base in the city. The delegation will listen to their testimonies amid calls for international protection for their home areas. In his second speech to the Syrian people since the violence started on Thursday, Syrian interim President Ahmad al-Shara vowed investigation and accountability after mass killings triggered an international backlash against his government. He accused forces loyal to depose Bashar al-Assad and foreign powers of fomenting unrest with the aim of dragging his country back into civil war. According to unconfirmed reports, the interim president may also visit Latakia today to send an assuring message to the Alawite community and encourage them to return to their villages. The Syrian media also reported today an attack on a security checkpoint in Damascus and another attack by members of the Kurdish ethnic minority in the city of Aleppo in North Syria. Haider Kazwini, CGTN, Damascus.
You can get highlights from the week's news in Europe and China direct to your inbox from CGTN's Storyboard email newsletter. Sign up at europe.cgtn.com/newsletter.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, Germany grounded. A widespread strike over pay sees flight chaos at airports across the country.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
Unprecedented scenes that we saw.
The cleanup operation is now well and truly underway.
Parts of southern Europe remain in a state of emergency.
Context gives meaning. People make history.
Far more than 1,000 people have come here today.
But authorities are still on high alert.
So now we've actually become the border on this road.
A complex world demands a comprehensive view.
But with the cleanup efforts more or less under control,
the economic impact is bound to ripple across the country.
There's plastic pollution everywhere.
Because the world today matters for your world tomorrow.
This is the living area of the crew.
The focus is firmly on future technologies.
Well, this is something completely different.
The world today, every day on CGTN. What do we mean when we talk about the difference? The difference is in the detail, the background,
defense ministers from
the wider angle and perspective of every story, wherever the story may be. CGTN. See the difference.
We are all connected. Across borders, across continents, connected by ideas, a shared humanity. Stay connected.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Juliet Mann. Our top stories. We need to reboot our country by driving modernisation. China's top political advisory body concludes its annual session in Beijing.
Counting the cost of a global trade war. European stocks fall to the lowest point in 3 weeks.
And European arms imports more than double over 4 years, with countries now more dependent on the United States than ever before.
Airport strikes in Germany are causing travel chaos. There have been widespread flight cancellations at 13 of the country's airports, including its two busiest in Frankfurt and Munich. Workers are staging a 24-hour walkout in a dispute over pay. The strike started earlier than expected at Hamburg Airport on Sunday and has now expanded nationwide. Let's talk to our correspondent, Natalie Carney, who's in Munich at the airport, I believe. Natalie, what more can you tell us about these strikes and disruption that they're causing?
Yes, well, according to Germany's Airport Association, more than 500,000 people are expected to be affected by this 24-hour strike that is due to disrupt or cancel more than 3,000 flights across these 13 airports. As you've mentioned, Frankfurt, the busiest airport in the country. Of their 1,116 flights that are scheduled for today, 1,054 have been canceled, and that number is expected to rise as we get through to the evening. The strike will end officially at 1 minute before midnight, so there still is quite a few hours to go. Here at Munich, the second busiest airport, only about 20% of flights are operational at this time, and even those are seeing some relatively severe delays. Now, this all has to do with pay, essentially. The Verdi union, which is the union for many of the employees here, public sector employees, employees of airport operators, ground handling services, and aviation security are all demanding higher wages, 8% per annum, or up to 380 euros per annum. As well, they want higher bonuses. They also want more days off, 3 to 4 days. Now, according to local municipalities and the federal government, that's just not possible. It's just not financially reasonable at this time, as it would amount to nearly 15 billion euros, according to some estimates. As you can hear, announcements have been filtering through the airport throughout the day, as well as on all the billboards. You can see some flights behind me here, but know that those are for tomorrow. So they are not for today. Again, only about 20% of flights have been operating here. Now, according to the German ADV, the German, again, Aviation Association here, they estimate that these strikes will cost the airlines and airports tens of millions of dollars in lost revenue, compensation claims, and operational recovery expenses. This is actually the third, at least here in Munich, strike in this regard. There were 2-day strikes about 2 weeks ago that disrupted flights as well here in Munich and a few other airports. But this is the first time that we're seeing these strikes simultaneously across the country. So a lot of disruption. However, this strike was announced on Friday. So many of the passengers that I have spoken to here understand why people are striking, are slightly frustrated, but a lot of them have been warned prior to this. So the tensions here have been somewhat alleviated in that regard.
Got it. Natalie Carney at Munich Airport, thank you very much.
The owner of a U.S. tanker says jet fuel is now spilling into the water off the coast of northeast England following a collision with a cargo ship. The local authorities say one person is in hospital while 36 others are safe and accounted for. Let's talk to our correspondent Li Jianhua, who's following the story. What's going on then?
Well, Jamie and Juliet, there are dramatic pictures emerging on social media. Both ships are reportedly on fire. The Telegraph newspaper has this picture of smoke billowing out of one of the vessels. And the tanker is the U.S. flag Stena Immaculate, which had travelled from Greece. It is one of the 10 vessels used by the U.S. military to carry fuel during conflicts or emergencies. An ex-Page Navy lookout said the container vessel is the Portuguese-flagged Solon, which was travelling from Scotland to the Netherlands. And this image shows the position of the two vessels. The tanker, the red one, appears to have been hit while at anchor at 9:48 GMT. And many people have raised concerns about the impacts of this crash. This account shows footage reportedly showing the tanker on fire and says it could cause an environmental disaster. The owner of the tanker said jet fuel has split into the North Sea following the collision. Meanwhile, as you say, Jamie, 37 people have been brought ashore with one person in hospital.
Jianhua, thank you for that. Our correspondent Li Jianhua. Greenland heads to the polls on Tuesday in what's widely seen as the island's most significant ever election. The reaction to President Trump's message that the United States will get the island one way or the other has sparked concern among many voters. Our correspondent Yolo David reports now from the capital, Nuuk.
In the frozen north, on the world's largest and least populated island, there's lots at stake. An election to choose a new government and a looming independence vote.
Greenland's independence is my main focus, but also the fight for our own rights, to live a life based on our own regulation, no longer under Denmark. Like any legislation here in Greenland is first written in Danish by Danish employees within the government, and it should be the opposite.
Greenland's future is at a crossroad, and it'll be decided by its 40,000 voters in the most significant election held here for decades. Today's politics is as much about the past as it is about the future.
The first thing the Parliament has to do is to confirm our sovereign nation, our rights, and then moving forward on our own premises, not what Donald Trump wants from us.
Greenland's Parliament has 31 seats, and those elected will have far-reaching decisions to take.
We never asked to be American. We never asked to be Danish. We only want to be Greenlanders.
In some ways, this statue of Hans Egede, a Christian missionary who landed here in 1721, has tied this territory to Denmark. It was the beginning of a 300-year colonial and at times uneasy relationship with Greenland. The majority of the Inuit people who live here are incredibly proud of their heritage and don't see themselves as Danes. Now they want a different future for Greenland.
That could come from the U.S. president's transactional approach to diplomacy.
We need Greenland for national security and even international security, and I think we're going to get it. One way or the other, we're going to get it.
There is a minority who promote closer ties with the United States. Jørgen Boisen was a bricklayer, but by now is almost a full-time influencer in this election. He's connected to the Trump administration and tells all who listens how Greenland needs a closer relationship with North America.
I think, the Trump interest to Greenland is so big that he has benefit of that I'm kind of the diplomacy to the Trump haters, try to convince people Trump is not a bad person, U.S. is good now, U.S. trustable now.
Greenlandic politics has rarely matched its landscape. The majesty of this unique environment hides a potential source of wealth as the ice melts, and if rare earth minerals are mined extensively in the future. Greenlanders sense there's more at stake in this election than ever before. Joloap David, CGTN, Nuuk, Greenland.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, why the school run just got a whole lot easier for these children in China.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
Unprecedented scenes that we saw. The cleanup operation is now well and truly underway.
Parts of southern Europe remain in a state of emergency.
Context gives meaning. People make history.
Far more than 1,000 people have come here today.
But authorities are still on high alert.
So now we've actually become the border on this road.
A complex world demands a comprehensive view.
But with the cleanup efforts more or less under control,
The economic impact is bound to ripple across the country.
There's plastic pollution everywhere.
Because the world today matters for your world tomorrow.
This is the living area of the crew.
The focus is firmly on future technologies.
Well, this is something completely different.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. New technology is transforming the construction world. Remote-controlled equipment powered by artificial intelligence is allowing builders to carry out work without setting foot on site. Our correspondent Chen Yilin reports.
This isn't a VR construction game. What the workers operating is a real excavator for a real construction site.
Just look inside the cabin. There's no driver.
All is driven by remote control.
Seeing this in action really makes you think, is this a machine or a robot? While there's no official answer yet, the reality is these smart giants are already a regular fixture on the construction sites.
But what can it really do? I'm meeting one of the leading service providers to find out.
It's one of our applications. Our expert excavators is working here.
So, where is the excavator?
Well, it's inside the bulk carrier.
To understand the revolutionary change, we have to see it from above.
Well, it's over there. the operator has to climb up, down the ladder for every shift, every day. It's dangerous. And sometimes the materials, for example, like coal mine, it will release toxic gases like carbon oxide. It's bad for the health. So when we do the teleoperations, no human beings will work inside.
Instead, they're now working in an office. No dust, no noise. It's a world away from traditional construction.
I'm amazed by what technology can do these days. Having spent years operating excavators on site, the improvements in our working environment are remarkable. Work is more enjoyable now, and the efficiency has also increased.
The big question is, how can remote operations of heavy machinery achieve the precision of on-site work? That's where AI takes center stage.
Originally, if you sit inside the excavator, you know exactly how deep it is, the distance. But when you do like teleoperations with a screen, it's pretty hard to tell, all right? So what we do is the LiDAR generate the point cloud, which is like 3D surroundings information. Together with the image, we can do the training and train the computers to know exactly, for example, where the bucket is.
That means the technology is not only for mapping the surroundings, but also for assisting operators with what they can't see on site. Revolutionizing such an age-old industry is never easy. But China's focus on innovation over the past 5 years has created fertile ground for startup innovators like Builderex Robotics to flourish. And now they are taking their technology global.
Especially like our industry is a global-wise problem. Everyone is working like that. I think technology should be work like that. Technology has their own temperature, warm. It should be warm. Okay. It should not be like cold stuff. With the technology around people, then this industrials people, I think they have living a better life.
For Sui Shaolong, this transformation isn't just about machines. It's about people and a better quality of life. Chen Ling, CGTN, Nanjing, Jiangsu Province.
Now, climbing a mountain just to get to school is not something that most children have to worry about each morning. But that's been the reality for pupils in a remote part of China until a novel solution transformed their lives. Our correspondent Yang Jinghao reports.
Cai Xiong, a native of the region, is a major investor in the project.
When I was in elementary and middle school, I really wanted to leave this place. Seeing this change now brings back memories of my childhood. I'm really happy. It feels like a weight has been lifted from my heart.
Today, the canyon is attracting an increasing number of tourists, creating new opportunities for locals through businesses like restaurants and homestays.
We have excellent tourism resources here. In addition to the Grand Canyon, we also have vast grasslands and thousands of hectares of azaleas. We will speed up the development of all area tourism to drive growth across the entire township.
Now the children look toward a world full of possibilities.
When I grow up, I want to open a hospital here, so that elderly people won't have to travel to the city for treatment when they are sick.
For them, without the confinement of the mountains, no journey is too far and no dream is out of reach. Yang Jinghao, CGTN, Xuanwei, Yunnan Province.
Well, for thousands of years, indigenous societies have lived in the Amazon forest. And now, scientists are using remote technology to uncover evidence that these ancient civilizations developed sustainable practices that still benefit the world today. Our correspondent Lucretia Franco reports.
The world's largest rainforest, the Amazon, spanning 6.7 million square kilometers, nearly 60% of it located in Brazil. Now using LiDAR, light detection and ranging technology, researchers are uncovering traces of long-lost civilizations. Beaming out 1 million penetrating laser pulses per second, the apparatus creates three-dimensional maps, revealing earthwork patterns previously seen only in deforested areas. And it's here at Brazil's National Institute for Space Research that a team of investigators sifted through LiDAR data and came to a most remarkable conclusion about just how densely populated the Amazon was.
Very close to Amazonia.
Geographer Vinicius Peripato has been leading the project for the past 8 years.
We are currently discovering that the Amazonia is not so pristine as people think. It can be much more human modified than we thought, because we are discovering these huge ancient societies that were living beneath the forest.
While on-site verification is pending, the findings suggest at least 10,000 large, sophisticated pre-Columbian earthworks lie hidden on the forest floor. And there may be many more than that.
They were such an organized group that they had a specific location to deposit the waste, and all this organic material concentrated in a specific place, they became what they call terra preta, which is much more fertile due to the organic composition.
It is a striking discovery, and Peripato says that the black earth terra preta could be one of the main reasons the Amazon rainforest continues to sequester carbon.
We are currently developing this hypothesis to analyze even the soil that could store more carbon than ordinary one, and also the forest itself, because you have much more shrubs, much more subsoil that can lead to more carbon storage.
It is an example of how indigenous peoples shape the forest with advanced planning and sustainable ecological practices that inadvertently could be helping to mitigate global warming today. Lucrecia Franco, CGTN, São José dos Campos.
Now, if you're feeling a bit rough, perhaps a winning whippet could be just what the dog tour ordered. Muccia from Venice has won the coveted Best in Show title at the 2025 Crufts Dog Show. The 4-year-old beat more than 18,000 others to become top dog at the event in the UK city of Birmingham. She's the first ever winner from Italy in the show's 134-year history. The runner-up, by the way, as you ask, was Viking, a Tibetan Mastiff from Romania. So a round of applause for both. I think that's enough of that, really.
Fantastic. The headlines again. We need to reboot our country by driving modernisation. China's top political advisory body concludes its annual session in Beijing.
Our other headlines: counting the cost of a global trade war, European stocks fall to the lowest point in 3 weeks.
And European arms imports more than double in 4 years, with countries more dependent on the United States than ever before.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
Coming up next on CGTN Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow. Same time, same place. From all the team here in London, goodbye.
Bye.